Hi, Virginia.
Hi, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for
Excellent.
calling.
Oh, I would not have missed this for the world.
Me neither.
Let me tell people who you are. You're Virginia Heffernan. You've done so many things that I don't know what to dwell on. You were Slate's first TV critic. You were a TV critic for the New York Times, a columnist for the New York Times Magazine,
Mm-hmm.
where you wrote about the internet,
That's right.
which could lead us directly to the book we're going to talk about, unless you would like to say more about yourself.
Only that the thing that I'm always trying to press against is my early life experience of doing a PhD in English at Harvard. So there's always a little pull toward academic writing,
Which
and
which enters into this book, and we'll get to
yeah,
academia a little bit. Yeah.
yeah. So I did. It took me a while to learn the more lucid, declarative style of journalism.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Because you're such a lively, crisp, kind of stylish writer. I mean, you have tremendous. Like I read this and I go, where does she get the energy? I just can't bring that much energy to each sentence.
I don't know. I don't exercise. Do you exercise? You probably tire yourself out in the gym. I just
That's
sit
my
around and
mistake.
work.
That's my mistake.
Yeah, don't ever go outside.
I'm leaving it in the locker room, as some people say. So, well, anyway, congratulations. It's a cool book. And you know what?
You.
I mean, first of all, I apologize to our audio podcast listeners for the fact that I'm holding this up to the screen and they can't see that. But there's something that even the viewers are missing about this. There's a three-dimensional quality to the jacket that's really cool because each of the little dots that constitute these letters are actually kind of a raised rubbery thing, and it's a great effect.
Yeah, it has this sort of bumpy, the tips of what could be fiber optics or something actually
Yeah,
play with the finger. There's a haptic quality to it.
haptic. That's the word.
I will say, when I got the book, I didn't know that's what it was going to be. It was a surprise from the Simon & Schuster art department. And I said, wow, thank you so much for this Braille effect. And then for some reason I panicked thinking that wasn't politically correct.
To call
I
it
don't know
Braille.
what happened. I was like, should it be challenged, visually challenged something? Anyway, it turns out Braille is completely not offensive.
It's
And
okay. That
yeah.
occurred to me, too, that you could actually read this title with your fingers, in
I
principle.
think you could, right, whether or
Yes.
not you know Braille.
Right. Anyway, it's called Magic and Loss. The subtitle is The Internet as Art. And these two angles are interesting because, on the one hand, when we talk about the internet, I mean, the book's about the internet. And when we talk about the internet, it is kind of natural to get into this, good or bad thing. And that is a theme. And that is reflected in the title Magic and Loss. But you're obviously up to something more than that with the subtitle. What are you up to with the subtitle?
Well, when you say good and bad, those terms seem to come from ethics, or they might seem to come, with like if I had strong moral standards about what was upsetting, the body politic or the socius or our brains, or I might have some idea of healthy, unhealthy in a neuroscience or psychological vocabulary. I don't have those vocabularies, so. When I put it when I describe the magic and loss as effects of the internet, I'm talking about the way that art has effects on us. So the feeling we have that we're missing something when we hear, say, digital music is not because we are missing something, but because there's something in that digital experience that is, as engineers say, lossy.
No, they mean that in a technical sense. They mean that digital representations of things inherently lose some of the information in the analog version.
That's right. But for the human brain, that registers as a certain kind, and some all the way up to an insult, but at least in the short term, as like a deficiency or a shortfall. And that is the thing I think we're trying to name, that sense of grieving for what we're being denied. That's what I think we're trying to name when we register all this anxiety and even affront or anger at the digital revolution. But I will say that is counterbalanced by the magic. So
The impression I got is that your view, although you don't do an explicit summing up, is that your view is that it is more than counterbalanced by the magic. But maybe I'm wrong.
Well, yeah. Well, I like poetry, and one of the things that I say in the chapter about Steve Jobs, I sort of liken Jobs to Dante. And one of the things that Dante says is, and I've told you this to make you grieve, that, the effect of grieving is not a bad effect, right? Like, there is in the specter of the internet as this immortal, godlike, all-knowing entity to which none of us can aspire, and in the mirror of which all of us feel stunted and somehow deficient. There's a powerful sense of grieving that I think it's worth actually experiencing. Actually experiencing. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it means it has this poetic effect of elegy. So, there's almost no one who uses the internet who doesn't long for at least some feature of non-digital experience. And in some cases, and I think I suggest at the end of the book, that we start missing the death and decay that is part of objects in the material world, that's part of our physical bodies, that's part of nature. And we grow tired of this, sort of all-seeing eye, or whatever it is, this immortal God that we all, have to, in some cases, genuflect to. On the other hand, the magic. So I also like abstraction. I'm not a person who, and I think you and I have this in common, that we had a conversation a long time ago about, we sort of saw ourselves as brains in vats for a long time. I liked living in the language. I liked living in symbols.
Did I say I saw myself as a brain in a vat?
You said you hadn't been very in touch with your body in the early part of your career.
Man. Had I been drinking? No, I don't even drink. Oh, well, go
No,
ahead.
this was like in the morning.
It was a slate retreat, probably, right?
It was the sleigh retreat right after we'd been whitewater rafting. And anyway, I think you've probably since remedied that. But I was a kid that liked two dimensions. I liked the page. I liked pictures. I liked poems. I liked reading. I liked being buried in this strange symbolic universe that would conjure new worlds. And then I saw that in the screen of the first computer I looked.
And in fact, you segued early. I mean, the circumstances of your youth made it easy to get into computers before computers were cool and part of everyday life. And that was probably a pretty natural transition, right? It was still a world of symbols and...
Yeah, it was, I started so it was 1979 or so, and I had a computer. I was lucky enough to get some exposure to the computer language BASIC just by chance as a child in school. And my parents bought a dumb terminal. It's like a Chromebook, basically, has nothing in it until you dial in with a modem.
And use time sharing, probably, right? We
used time sharing, exactly. Yeah, it was the Dartmouth DTSSC, which is Dartmouth Time Sharing Something System. And the two things happened pretty much the first time I used a computer, when we didn't call it the internet, and I also didn't know computing from network computing. I hadn't tried word processing or anything that would have come complete with an Apple IIe. So the first things I saw were, one, this great deep space background with the phosphor letters. You can picture it from war games, and green letters in the front. And the letters were so suggestive because they were written by other people, hello, or, what are you doing right now? And, you're like a 9, 10, 11-year-old kid. There's so much frisson and excitement. I mean, I still liked crank calls in those days, just talking to a stranger.
So you would call a store and say, do you have Prince Albert in a can? And if they said yes,
kidding?
You'd say, well, you better let him out.
The height of humor. Right. Exactly. The height of humor. Or call the operator for the time and then strike up a conversation with her. I don't know. I just like talking to strangers. So that was in the foreground of the screen, was this excitement of talking to a new person, and in the background was just a space for full-on projection. It looked like the opening credits of Star Wars, or just that Star Trek, just black space. And it was mental space too. And, like some critics say, the Old Testament is written in this way that you can see the face of God behind it because the writing is it has such loose connections. In the beginning was the word. Well, you don't get much explication. So you start to imagine that there's something powerful back there. So it's an effect of the early internet for me to imagine, what did this connectivity mean? What was back there? Who was with me? Who was watching me? And I chose to believe with time that it was a creative and benevolent force. And, the fact that until recently we capitalized the word internet suggests to me that we have a certain amount of holy reverence for that and eventually for the cloud.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I remember in the early 80s when I went on one of these things. It was either one of these chat room things when they were like totally new. It was either via the Source or CompuServe or something. It was just so wild.
Yeah.
Like, these words are coming from a person, but you don't know that person. That was like a new thing because previously you would have written whenever you read something, it was from somebody who was in some sense known to you. It was an author who you'd read their bio. It was a friend who wrote a letter, and I had to pause and I don't know how to communicate with it. I mean, how do you do this? I mean,
that's a great point because in school at the same time that I was doing this at home, and you probably had this experience too, we were learning how to write quote business letters with address, date, and you had to have your street address, not just on the envelope, but in the letter itself. Mm-hmm. And, if you left off your street address or other information, that was mostly because you knew the person and it was a really intimate letter, but there was no question who it was coming from and who it was going to. Part of the reason that I say part of the reason I say the internet's art is that we all use avatars. So the first time I saw, avatars was in that very first contact with the internet that I was describing. I had to sign in to be someone in this fantasy game that doubled as a chat room, and I didn't for a second.
You mean they were visual avatars, or you just had a fake name?
No, just names, but handles. That had, and they were using some of the tropes and memes and practices of ham and shortwave radio and CB radio. So they were talking, I think maybe handles or names, but you would burnish that avatar. So mine was Athena. And, a lot of the people, I was 9 and, a chubby 9-year-old. So what better person to qualify to be Athena?
Now, Athena remind us, that's wisdom?
That's, she's wisdom, but she's also a warrior.
Ah, okay.
I wanted it all. And then, there was Apollo and there were others around, and we, everything you did added to this avatar or took away from it. So if you wrote in all caps, if you used swear words, if you made reply all mistakes, if you wrote in cute little lowercase letters that made you seem so adorable, like I tried to do, and that's very like now. I mean, even at this very moment, we have avatars. We had to give each other, you and I had to give each other our Skype names. And we talked a little bit about what's behind us and these pixel images. This is not you and me having a conversation in the flesh at a cafe, Right. This is a different thing. And it's on the internet right now. And it will play on the internet. And so that is a kind of play acting, masquerade fantasy that has always been part of the internet, but that we mistake for reality now. So part of the book is defining it, more clearly as art, so that we can recognize that it's the tools of the humanities that will help us get through it and help us enjoy it. So
you're saying the internet is kind of mistaken for reality.
It's such seductive realist art that you very quickly slip from saying, you would never say, my character, page 88, said on Twitter. You just say, I said on Twitter.
Well, you did kind of say it on Twitter.
Yeah, there are things that page 88 says and does.
Page 88 is your Twitter handle, we should add.
That's my Twitter handle, exactly. That I don't exactly do and say. And I am aware of that difference. For one, in life, as you can tell, I talk in more than 140 characters, sometimes, to my own disappointment. But keeping that distinction is important, especially if, I don't know if you've ever been in the Twitter Coliseum for something you've written, but, it's pretty brutal.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to your own experience in the Twitter Coliseum, because one thing I want to say is that the book, I mean, as is suggested by what you just described about your early entry into the world of computers. Yep. The story, your apprehension of all this, is kind of tied in with your personal, intellectual, and even spiritual journey.
Yeah.
Which doesn't become fully apparent until the last chapter, actually.
Yeah.
But we will get to your own traumatic experience in the Twitter Coliseum. But yeah, it's, well, we've all spent a little time in some degree of Twitter Coliseumness, I think.
I mean, I'll tell you one way that, just one very practical way that seeing the internet as art is very helpful. I reviewed Nancy Jo Sales's terrific book, American Girls, about girls using the internet, and it had such good reporting in it. And there were many cases where girls had really had their feelings hurt or been hazed, or had, their faces, their head, pixelated pictures of them grafted onto other people's naked bodies and then not distributed, and it was very embarrassing, hurt feelings, hazing, disgraced and slandered them. On the other hand, and there was account after account of this happening and how we could protect our in particular daughters. But it did occur to me that we're not talking about STDs and pregnancy or rape or tissue damage or bodies being battered, or even physical intimacy that's, maybe difficult to handle. And that the term slips so much from bullying and hazing to like violating, that I was like, we really do need to make a distinction between what happens to you online and what happens to you in life. And
although it's so easy to confuse the two. I mean, I remember I wrote a cover story for the New Republican, I think 94. It was early. And the subtitle was Robert Wright Enters the Internet, because nobody had been. I mean, nobody reading that piece just about had ever been on the internet. The World Wide Web was unknown even to me when I wrote the piece, but the internet was there. And I remember using the phrase emotional permeability to describe the internet, saying it was remarkable. I had just been on these, what were the chat groups called? The internet, the generic internet chat system. IRC, Internet Relay Chat or something. It was a kind of bulletin board, but I remember noting how people could say things that made you really happy or really hurt you, and it's true. And when you think about it, this has always been true. Human language has always been able to hurt people deeply, and this is a mediator of human language. It shouldn't surprise us, but you're kind of saying this is another example of how we maybe should be a little clearer on the difference between actual physical stuff and what the internet brings. Or
I mean, I think we are becoming much, shrewder players of internet life. I really do. I mean, it's, as you say, so new. So 1994, nobody knew what the World Wide Web is, and now we're, 22 years later, and we completely inhabit it. The bulk of our time is spent in it. So if we were talking about the birth of a nation, if we were talking about America, after the Revolution, or after the Pilgrims arrived, we would really be talking about a civilization just at its very beginning, and our skills wouldn't be very good of it, in figuring out how to be in it. So no wonder we're making all these kind of errors of thinking that it actually does physical damage to the body, to be called a bad word online. I get that. I think that we, I understand those mistakes. I also think there's a certain hysteria when, I came to the internet through a Dungeons and Dragons like game. That's what the ambiance of that first chat room was. I chose Athena, but a lot of the people were using Led Zeppelin language and Arthurian language, and there were books around at the time worrying that kids were going to believe in the fantasy games they were playing and get lost in them and never come out, right? And they would be like, I am a cleric, I am a dwarf, I am a high priestess. The same has been said about novels, that, novels would trip a wire for young women, and they would be persuaded that promiscuity or extramarital sex was somehow all right because they would create this new world, and then that would lead them to lasciviousness and depravity. And I'm sure there were people, I mean, you probably know, there are all these great stories kind of like the Stephen King novel Misery, where readers of books did get over-invested in the characters in the book, and people wept when Joe died in Dickens. So, you know, we do have these responses, and I get that, but it's partly because we've sort of forgotten some of the tools that could help us from the humanities. And those are the ones that distinguish between effects of a literary work or a work of art and actual properties of it.
Right, but you wouldn't. It's not like you're discouraging all emotional reaction. I mean, near the end of the book, you describe yourself crying in response to a YouTube video in a way that was very significant for you, and which we'll get to, I think. But right, I mean, and I mean,
yeah, a reaction to a work of art that's like, I mean, for instance, a reaction to a work of art of tears seems appropriate to me. I mean, that seems like an appropriate reaction.
But like taking offense doesn't.
Yeah, locking down your doors or feeling like you are in danger maybe seems less so. Although there are online crimes that have turned into offline crimes, so you know a certain amount of precaution is useful. But the concentration on, you know, someone like asked me recently, why is Twitter so angry? Twitter can't be a work of art. It's so angry. Where, like, if you've ever been to the Whitney Biennial, there's a lot of freaking anger there too. Like, art is angry, and short form populist sloganeering is, like you see on Twitter, is often angry. And you may think that mob language like Twitter should never live. Like, people should never talk like that, and that reasoned argument or, you know, music or, you know, are better forms of expression. And if so, shut down your Twitter account. But there is definitely, in my view, a time and a place for staccato, short form, populist, exchanges that call out certain people. And, you know, anyway, Twitter is, you know, just part of the argument of the book, but it's in the text chapter. But it's a nice litmus for this, you know.
So you're encouraging a certain kind of critical detachment in the way we apprehend the internet?
That's right. You know, observation without judgment first. You know, like when I think of certain inflammatory kinds of speech online, I really have tried, mostly, you know, in my various columns about the internet, to take a formal approach to them. So reading Donald Trump's tweets, for example, like, how is he putting these together? How is he putting these sentences together to give us the effect Donald Trump is scary? Like, how does that work? Well, I know how Willa Cather makes you feel scared when she writes a book. And in some ways, Trump does sort of the same thing. So what Trump may or may not do as president is separate from the like feeling we have of nervousness and destabilization when we read his tweets. And since language is extremely powerful, as you say, what is he doing? What are his tricks? How does the language work to make him so scary? Another example, I'm especially interested in banned speech online. And one of the forms of banned speech are the, kind of harrowing videos and pictures called thinspiration. Do you know what they are?
No.
They're images of emaciated women designed to inspire anorexics to eat less and so forth. They come with poetry and music and so on.
All right. There's a kind of a group now of kind of proud anorexics, right?
Yeah, proud anorexics. But, in response to that, there have been efforts at Tumblr and other places to ban thinspiration. So to see thinspiration as like a diseased and dangerous form of speech. Obviously that's not a First Amendment thing. This is just, one of those. Instagram had the same rule for a while. So it was difficult because it's tempting to see all that through the lens of pathology. But when I started to talk to the filmmakers, to the women themselves, they are trying to make short, interesting videos. And there was a poetry around, like, I don't want to get too deep in this, but the dematerialization of the self. There's a fantasy of like walking between raindrops and leaving no footsteps and, just being like pure light. That was, not uninteresting. And, if I could get out of the idea that there's something, or at least table for a minute the idea that this is a health issue, it was also an aesthetic issue. And especially because these women saw themselves as artists, trading music back and forth, praising each other for how they scored the videos or how they cut the videos or which images they used. It was became a much easier way to talk to this population of women.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm guessing that some of the attitude you're conveying here, you carry into so-called real life, right? Like with these campus issues on speech codes and so on, I would guess that you generally say, hey, buck up, it's a tough world, right?
The people who mostly need to buck up are not the people with trigger warnings, but it seems the people that ask me the most about free speech say they think the internet has curbed speech because people are so easily offended. Well, offensive speech has always been protected. You can say what you want, and other people, like, if you can handle their being offended, if you can handle their telling you you're a mansplainer, you're allowed to say whatever you want. Toughen up. Make your racist joke if you want. It actually seems the internet seems to have liberated other voices that are allowed to tell you they're offended, that are allowed to say when you're in this idiom set, you're beholden to these responsibilities. I've had this happen to me so many times. Tried to, several years ago, I guess, I tried to say something about typos online and how they function. And as an example of a typo, random typo, I chose TEH, right? And you probably know this. Suddenly I found myself down the rabbit hole with elite programmers or whatever, and the 4chan crowd who were like, you are an idiot with no understanding that teh plays this particular role in our special.
It's a mutation that became a joke, right?
It's a mutation that became a meme or joke, yes.
Right.
But that seems small. But I also tripped a wire for particular participants on black participants on Twitter who pointed out that this thing that I had said, I was actually quoting another tweet, but I came to understand that my using the language of this other tweet was not, was at least unaware of this idiom that I hadn't mastered, mm-hmm. and that I was trying something like out of my depth. And that, for me, has been the joy of the internet, which is like, oh, then I don't say, I can't say anything on the internet. I can't say TEH as a random thing, because then someone's going to tell me that it means this other thing. It means what a great way to have the immune system of my vocabulary and my language tested by getting it exposed to all these different vocabularies. Mm-hmm. Some of them pigeons, some of them emoji, some of them, like trying to learn GIFs or trying to learn ASCII is like, you feel your brain exploding with growth, I feel like.
Right, and one thing the internet has done is brought into contact these people from these different cultures and different groups that always had their own internal kind of speech codes. All groups have speech codes.
Yeah.
And there's naturally going to be a learning process. Now, it seems to me, ideally, the learning process would not be super high friction. In other words, it would be nice if people were inclined to politely explain to people something they didn't understand about why what they said offended someone, rather than so brutally shouting them down that, bad things happen. But at the same time, some friction is inevitable. And
yeah. It seems like you're mostly talking about Twitter. Facebook is, it's funny because they're such different.
Because on Twitter you can follow anyone. On Facebook, you need someone's permission to follow them.
Well, it's name, rank, and serial number. People often have, it's standard practice to have pictures of your family or some personal pictures that sort of tell people where you live and announce that you're pure of heart. And you sign in with Facebook all the time, so it follows you around, and there's even a credit card associated with Facebook, so it has a certain dignity to it.
Yeah, but I do think it's important that all the people you're kind of broadcasting to in the near term are people you have personally accepted as friends.
Right, that's right.
And on Twitter, that's not the case. You get the blowback from people you didn't know they were following you. Maybe they weren't, but even if they were, you didn't know it. Anyway.
Yeah. That's true. I follow really widely on both, and I certainly have accepted as friends people I don't know very well, or at all. But but at the same time, you know, there's something about the interface on the Facebook software that encourages. The very first time I was introduced to Facebook, it wasn't quite out of college as it was at Ohio University, and one kid said, you know, adults might be able to get on Facebook soon. You should take a look at it. And he was like, do Facebook and not MySpace, because Facebook is for wit and for linear thinking, and MySpace is for people who like Death Cab for Cutie and are emo. And, you know, MySpace was always images and music and curly cues, and Facebook encourages what now are like short essays, you know, sometimes personal essays, sometimes political essays, but it's like it's very, very hard to find that kind of like, you know, bluster and rage. You know, there's some enraged stuff, but mostly it's like Democrats and Republicans having a frank and friendly, you know, exchange of views. Mm-hmm. And if things get too heated in a comment section, the head of it, you know, the person whose page it's on, often like shuts it down. Mm-hmm. And that, by the way, was a feature of Conference XYZ, that first chat room I joined in 1979. Every conversation had a master, and the master could kill anyone in violation of, you know, his sensibilities, meaning knock them off the network.
Okay, so let's jump ahead from that experience to the experience you begin the book with much later in your life, when you kind of discover YouTube and this mesmerizing video of a South Korean guitarist doing a version of, what is it, Pachelbel's Canon?
Pachelbel's Canon, exactly. So I'm not going to hum it for you because it's like...
Because you've heard it at a wedding.
We've all heard it at a wedding, and it's like, you know, it's a bit overexposed, but a guy who goes by Jerry C., a Taiwanese composer. This is the person who mixed it. Took that familiar melody. He doesn't speak English. He doesn't have much feeling for Western culture, and turned it into a shred guitar version. You know, a very complicated guitar version. And he posted an image of himself playing it because there's an understanding among these amateur guitarists, who sort of were already speaking to each other on the internet. This is 2005, 2006. We're already kind of reaching out to each other on the internet, that there's no agreed on tablature, and lots of people can't read music, basically. Mm-hmm. And so absent those tabs, the best way to show how you play guitar is to make a video of it. And what's interesting is this is a Baroque piece. It's the Pachelbel's Canon. And during the Baroque, during the period of chamber music, you tried to be in the same room with the person playing so you could watch their fingers on the keys or strings. And so here you go. And Jerry C. makes this instructional video of himself playing this very difficult and challenging version of this piece. That is, it's a show-off thing. It's like, you know, I understand that musicians, I've now shown it to so many people, and musicians, you know, have mixed feelings about it, but just for degree of difficulty, this thing is out of this world. And a kid named Jung Hyun Lim, but he has sort of a nom de guerre, Fun2, Funtwo, sees the video and decides he can do it too.
He's in South Korea.
He's in Korea, exactly. Okay. They encountered each other on a message board, on a Korean message board that Jerry C. was also using, but for guitarists. So, Fun2, someone gets a hold of the video, also on this message board, of Fun2 doing it, and decides that he's like basically outdone Jerry C. And they take the video and upload it to YouTube, which is, you know, then only a few months old. And it's not acquired by Google. No one knows what it is, but it's very easy. The founders of YouTube, Chad Hurley and Steve Chen, have made it very, very easy to share videos on there. Their streaming technology is second to none. The fact that it holds up and is still this like incredibly powerful repository for videos, you know, proof that they really laid down some good tracks. Mm-hmm. Incidentally, they were part of the PayPal diaspora that, you know, just has winner after winner. And so the video came my way, came onto my screen. I've been reviewing television. I wasn't given the totally plumb like HBO premieres, because that they belong to the other critic. So I was always like looking for another kind of TV. And I just was like, how am I allowed to watch this without buffering, without downloading it on my screen? Mm-hmm. And it also is so much more engaging than anything I see on MTV. It's like completely badly shot with, the way that, sort of like the way that people
Well,
start.
there's a kind of beauty to. I mean, I just watched it right before we started this conversation, and he's kind of backlit. The window, I think there's a window behind him with sunlight streaming.
Yeah.
You never see his face because he's got this baseball cap on and his head is down on the guitar.
Yeah.
And he's consistently lit, silhouetted by this powerful light. It's kind of cool.
It's amazing, and it like there's sort of like this, there's a haze feeling, and the glow brings out that haze, and then he has this very blue T-shirt on, and he's in this anonymous bedroom, and he has there's incredible shyness to him from the neck up,
right,
and then this aggression at the level of his fingers on the guitar. Like,
right.
He might as well be Jimmy Page. He thinks he's a front man on stage, playing with, all the, it's like all of his chi is going in down there, and the rest of it is just like, let's take my face and brain out of the equation. And so his body and fingers are just speaking for him. And I just was determined to meet him and find out the story of this video.
And this was like a mesmerizing thing for you, and like a big moment for you. This was like your discovery of a good part of the magic of the internet.
Yeah, one thing that I had been told that sort of discouraged me from writing about online video was that it would all turn to porn soon.
Mm-hmm.
And, the idea was the internet was for porn, as they say in Avenue Q, and YouTube would be porn soon. But it wasn't porn. And, Silicon Valley, in all its like antiseptic sensibility, decided to really keep porn off, off iTunes, off YouTube. And the result is all these diverse flora and fauna grew instead. But the thing was, I brought to online video maybe the same prurience a little bit, and like willingness to like look in places that I wouldn't normally look, that I might have brought to porn. Like, am I doing something wrong? And when I saw Fun 2, a kid alone in his bedroom playing guitar in this aggressive way, but being anonymous, it felt like it was a perfect bait and switch, because it satisfied the same desire that I might have had to look at porn, but wasn't pornography. It was like a really weird, exciting thing that I wanted to watch over and over again. And it was just so much more interesting than like, half nude people on MTV.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to me here, I mean, I don't want to harp on the internet good or bad theme, but we're getting at both here in a way, because, look, if something's enthralling, there must be something interesting about it. On the other hand, the internet is the biggest, like, addiction machine and distraction machine in the history of the universe. It's like, right before, like I said, I was like, just only an hour and a half ago, I was like, I found myself, it's so easy when you watch one YouTube video, because YouTube has gotten so good at queuing up a video you're going to like if you liked this one, that it's like another one comes on and I'm like, oh, cool. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to think about what I'm going to ask Virginia. And this is it's a significant, like, for example, I have just taken Twitter off the computer that I actually use to work. Like, I don't get automatic password sign in on my browsers, and so I've just set, and I just don't go there on that computer. And that's the kind of thing that is necessary for me to get any work done. And maybe I'm unusually weak or something, but it is so powerful.
Yes. I mean, I'm just like leery about the language of addiction and pathology. I know that we, don't always feel great after a jam on the internet. But if you had been like, well, I stopped to see, Johannes play chamber music for a minute, and I ended up staying for, 4 hours. I don't know. Maybe that also would constitute like an addictive problem that was keeping you away from your work. But, you and I are so on the internet right now. I even have my phone nearby in case someone texts. I mean, and, is this addictive? Is there something sick and compulsive about this exchange? I mean, I don't think so. It's
not necessarily. I mean, it can become a practical problem if it's distracting you from work that in other moments you consider very important and valuable, and maybe your livelihood depends on.
Well, it may be distracting us from making a living, and that art often does that. And that's also not the worst thing. I mean, this is called meaning of life TV.
Right.
We're not trying to create productivity devices here. And the internet is, mostly not a productivity device. I mean, I would call, I would call.
We're gonna classify that as understatement. The internet is no, but actually we shouldn't. I mean, in so many ways, it is a productivity device. That's what's so weird about it. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Well, the thing of banning Twitter from your work computer seems like a completely great idea. I mean, there's no. I like the internet. But I also don't find. I don't quarrel with how much I use it and don't use it. It's not so impossibly hard to put down this or that part of it. And if I don't like something, I just stop doing it. So like Snapchat, I just couldn't keep up with it. I didn't do it. I stopped doing it. I think of I once heard this sermon in a synagogue about why kashrut, the kosher eating practices exist. And the idea was not that these specific laws were perfect, but they were, he said, a break on your avidity around meat, right? So we all kind of want to eat meat and like protein, and it's so satisfying and so whatever. Maybe not all of us instantly crave it, but many of us do. But why not pause a little bit before you put that fork to your mouth? Mm-hmm. Why not think about where did this animal come from? What this is like? I'm a being. I'm a mammal eating another mammal. Like, what is that about? And so, kosher puts up these flags that make it a little more difficult. And I thought that was fascinating. And I think a break on our avidity, like you just did by taking Twitter off your work computer, is a great idea. It's a great idea. That doesn't say that the computer's not magic. It doesn't say that it's not even nourishing like meat. It just says, I don't like the person I become when I'm crazily checking notifications for my name, on Twitter.
No, I mean, it is magic. I mean, you quote Arthur Clarke in the book, sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Yeah. It's really literally true. I mean, there's stuff we're doing today that my dad, if he were, I mean, he's not alive, but if you had told him, certainly when he was in his 20s, he would have said, no, that would have to be magic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like the fact that you can, you have this little device that can tell you how to get anywhere and exactly how long it's going to take given prevailing traffic conditions.
And then it communicates, if you're talking about ways with other people and essentially with the stars. I mean, the satellite technology is so, it's so mysterious, and it's so amazing that the Earth is mapped that way.
Now, this brings us to a loss. I'm going to mention something I consider a loss, and then I want to ask you to mention something you consider a loss. You mentioned some of them in the book. One of my most gratifying experiences in life, and this may be just me, but had been giving directions to strangers. When they stop and they ask you how to get somewhere, and you tell them and they drive off happily. I don't know why I got so much gratification out of that, but it basically doesn't happen anymore.
That I love that you chose that one, because I just learned the name of it. It's like disorientation disorder or something. Topographical. It has a great name. Topographical
agnosia?
Is that you can't find you're always lost?
Somebody accused me of having that, but I've heard that phrase.
Well, I'm often lost, and I have to leave a lot of time. I'm lost in familiar places sometimes, but it turns out that I have a fairly mild version. I mean, there's some people where they have a compass, but it's always in their head, but it's always exactly 30 degrees off. So it's But so take orientation. I mean, I have started actually. I don't know if you read this, but the Navy has started training sailors with sextants and compasses.
I did just talk to somebody about that actually on Blogging Heads. Yeah.
For fear of cyber attack on GPS technology.
Right. It's a backup system.
Yeah, and it occurred to me that I'd like to learn some of that. Because there is just a simple compass. The fact that it connects to the poles of the Earth is plenty magic.
Right.
And establishing myself in the material world and using whatever navigational, sub-bird navigational skills I have, with, strengthening that muscle. It's like people wanting to strengthen their memory. So I like that. On the other hand, I hate it when people ask me for directions because I never know what to tell them. And I also feel like the the conflict between, often spouses, um, the classic, like, men won't ask for
Right.
directions. The fact that women, and this is true with Wikipedia too, the fact that women and children and, maybe the less alpha person in the car has access to perfect navigational skills from the internet, or they can tell you the answer from Wikipedia or Google, destabilizes, the person that's supposed to know. And they're like, for a while I was watching reality TV, and I kept seeing couples have an argument where she would say, like, no, I think you're going the wrong way, the GPS says this, and he would take the, Garmin or the phone and throw it in the back, just like, don't upstage my skills here. And that could be the woman or the man in the car, not necessarily gendered. But my dad was allowed to opine on anything, and just facts, the average rainfall in China. And unless we were willing to trudge over to Funk and Wagnall's, encyclopedia and pull it down and look it up and, say that he was wrong, and we sometimes tried to, we, just accepted whatever his thing is. And also, we have fewer arguments about matters of fact that are won by the person with the sharpest elbows or the loudest voice. So, and I sort of like that we all have access to this incredible map of the world at our fingertips and this amazing archive of Wikipedia. But things that I'm good at, I don't like that the internet makes people better at, So, like, grammar, I'm good at it. I don't like that you can, like, sort of have your files checked for grammar or spelling, or you can use spell check. Like, my skills at spelling mean nothing now because most people, spell things right.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's the most important skill you possess as a writer, so I don't think you need to feel too threatened, but I take your point, I guess.
You know what I mean? Like, it's stuff you grew up with, as a kid, that were like, say you have a great sense of direction, so people ask you the way to go. Well, now everyone has a great, potentially, or access to a great sense of direction.
Well, and it's gonna climb higher and higher on the cognitive chain. I mean, the many things you still do have as distinctive attributes as a writer, those slowly, AI is gonna be able to do that or assist other people in kind of doing things more like what you do.
There's never, but here's the thing. So your directions, your skills with direction, I was finding the reason that I want to get compasses, and there's a course or a kind of occupational therapy for people who are disoriented like I am that I might want to enroll in, because I want to be able to, like, look up and experience myself in three-dimensional space instead of looking at a screen that looks the same all the time. Like, what am I doing?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I keep citing this study, but there's some kids in San Francisco, of all places, who decided that they are addicted to Facebook, or addicted to their phones. So they put a little LSD under their skin in the mornings. I don't recommend this, but
it's like a microdose, right?
Microdose subcutaneous LSD. They call it LSD breakfast. And they find they're so mesmerized by the faces of people on the bus that their phones are utterly boring to them. And, three-dimensional space is really beautiful and fascinating and absorbing. And when I'm walking down a street in a new city, I was just in Marrakesh. Instead of looking up, I was stabbing at my phone trying to figure out exactly where I was going.
Right.
And what the heck? Like, that's where you come in. That's where someone that, like, can take a couple of looks at the map of the souk and figure out, oh, here's roughly how to get here.
Yeah.
And, that's a richer experience.
Yeah, I was reprimanded by my daughter in Istanbul for doing the same thing. Walking down the street together, it's like, Dad, this is reality. So, any other...
Good for her.
So what's your biggest loss? You spend a little time on the telephone, the dearly departed actual phone conversation.
Yeah.
What is that a big one for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who miss vinyl and have, brought vinyl back. So far, those of us who miss landline phone calls don't seem to be bringing back copper wire with the same excitement. But, there's something in the great conductivity of copper wire that meant, you could hear, well, when I used to talk on landlines, sometimes you could hear, like, the crackle of a cigarette, or, like, you felt like you were, like, practically in the larynx or the ear canal. It was just, like, really beautiful hi-fi technology, and you felt so close to the person. And the calls could go on forever, and the melody of their voices were caught, and they were never dropped. And, cell technology doesn't pay attention to, there's no high res voice cell technology. Like it's crazy how, we call this a good signal, and still it has nothing like the resonance of your voice in person. And so, I miss that. I don't miss the things that were bad about it, that I had to stay in one place, that I had to, it's not like just simple nostalgia for something that used to be. It was better voice technology.
There was also, I think, the fact that you would invest that much time in a conversation with a single person. And I think that has been undermined in a totally different way by the internet, right? I mean, it just seems to me like the internet is, and in a way this is a long trend that the internet is just the latest instantiation of, but I mean, it kind of chops up our social connections into highly functional little interactions. You email them, you text them, then you Skype them, and you just, but it only lasts 5 minutes, and then, so, I mean, part of it was just the luxury of spending an hour and a half talking to a friend on the telephone, which is a luxury people don't...
like, focused and immersive communication.
Right.
I mean, I think part of the reason we jump off the phone, and millennials are said to hate voicemail and phone conversations, is just that it sounds so bad,
Yeah.
So that's part of it. But then the focus that you get of just someone's voice. I mean, I've been doing a lot of radio lately, like listening to the host in my head in the headset and talking into these like beautiful Austrian microphones just sets up this amazing loop. It feels like you're seeing, an incredible movie in Dolby sound. But the other part of that, the talking to one person, is a really good, interesting point about loss, which is it is the rare human mind that can register how many people are on this internet with us at any time. So, the fact that cell phone ownership approximates the population of the planet Earth now, and, we are doing this in billions, like, every time the new Facebook numbers come out, you just think, like, they've got to be lying. There is no way that they have, hundreds of millions. Is it almost to a billion
users? I think
users?
it's about 1 billion, and the rate of growth is what's so kind of astonishing.
And we don't know even what that remotely means. I can't process it. And the way that in a personal interaction it shows up is, did you see the movie Her with Joaquin?
I haven't seen that, no.
Okay, well, there's a moment where the Joaquin Phoenix character realizes that this operating system that he's fallen in love with, Scarlett Johansson, he's just a voice, is having the same kind of conversation and interaction with, several thousand people at the same time she's having with him. And, my boyfriend said to me not long ago, sometimes I feel like that guy in Her, because I'm just casually tapping, here's my phone, Twitter, or, my text box, and just like, I'll just finish this text really quickly. And especially when I'm looking at a Twitter feed, it's like a dozen people at a time that I'm like getting their inputs, or Facebook, or, updating, so that you do have a lot of voices in your head all the time. I mean, it's this crazy cacophony, so that when you sit down with one person and you try to get that LSD experience or the copper wire experience of like, just them, just Bob, just his voice, just his beard, it takes a new kind of concentration.
Yeah. Well, this is a luxury, what we're doing right now. I mean,
absolutely.
It's been what, close to an hour, which it's been like 15 minutes, which reminds me, we promised to get to your intellectual/spiritual journey, and also to talk about your experience in the Twitter Coliseum. And these are all kind of related, and I don't know where exactly you want to start. I mean, you've for some time been interested in various aspects of intellectual life. I mean, postmodern lit crit, various schools of philosophy. You've got a PhD and so on, and but it is interesting to me that the book ends on kind of a spiritual note. You don't make too much of it, and you don't really foreshadow it, so far as I recall at all. But why don't you start with the Coliseum experience, and then we'll move outward from there.
Okay, so and by the way, I just want to say quickly, in that ramping up to the ending of the book, I actually consciously had in mind your book Nonzero, which, as you know, I loved, where you do not see it coming at the end, that you speak of increasing organization as not quite in the human organism or in the organism that is the Earth, as, and I hope I'm getting this right, but as not quite teleological utopian, not at all, but just that it puts a little thumb on the scale to more elegance, more, and possibly, a kind of collective intelligence. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could almost have gone further. I mean, at the very end, I do raise the prospect of teleology. The reason I don't mention it before that is I want to convey that you can explain the whole thing, in my view, in strictly materialist terms.
Yes.
Evolution by natural selection. You can see cultural evolution as driven by technology, and you don't have to get spooky or invoking mystical forces, but that doesn't mean that the unfolding of this amazing machine is not in the service of some larger purpose that we don't understand. And so that's why I didn't want to, I keep trying to drive this home, and I keep getting misunderstood, that there is such a thing as a materialist teleology. But by the end, at the end of the book, I explicitly bring up the prospect of purpose. But
yeah, no, exactly, yes, and I think I think that maybe I go at it in a little more lightly, but in both cases, probably listeners, viewers can hear that we both have a certain amount of trepidation around this topic, because it's credibility compromising, it's authority compromising, to admit to even a meditation practice, much less a few attending church a few times a year, and that's rare. That's just these particular circles. Anyway, so to just back up to tell you the sordid details of my Coliseum days. I was working for Yahoo News somewhat unhappily. Yahoo News had a strange approach to journalism that treated it much more like marketing, and yet it had a huge readership. And I was really interested in how to engage that readership. So to stop writing for a New York Times readership and start writing for these 70 million readers that we had on the homepage every day. And I knew from the comment section something of what they were interested in, and partly it was like a patriotic version of Christianity. And so I decided to, the Times just called me a gleeful trickster. It's like just who I started out writing. You mean
in the review of this book?
In the review of this book.
Which was in the New York Times book review, last week?
Last week on Tuesday. Online on Tuesday. So, I did start, my first professional writing was humor writing. It's probably where I live, most comfortably. And TV columns always double as humor columns because TV's, can be such an easy punchline. So I wrote a piece that I thought was very playful, and it went awry. I just missed the mark of the tone that I was aiming for.
It was about creationism.
And it was called Why I Am a Creationist. Now, for whatever reason, I just think the idea of being a creationist, like William Jennings Bryan in Inherit the Wind, is just kind of funny. And it's also just funny to claim it for yourself, And I had also been very disappointed, and we've never talked about this, but disappointed in some of the sophistry that was driving, especially evolutionary psychology.
Yeah, we should have a whole separate argument about that. But anyway.
Yeah. So, and anyway.
But the Just So stories, and it's true that there are varying degrees of quality of evolutionary psychology analysis, I would concede. But anyway, so you were kind of, you had doubts about certain Darwinian worldview or some aspects of it.
Yeah, and also especially the armchair version. None of these people were talking in using any mathematical formulas or doing any original research on goldfinches. So I just didn't quite get it sounded like they were doing social science without even the rigor of social science. Mm-hmm. That said, and I felt the same way about neuroscience. So that went into it. The other thing that went into it was, I do not want to troll around fake issues like the mommy wars. I just am not, I'm a woman writer, and I'm expected to write about motherhood, and I'm expected to write about sexuality, and I don't care about those things in the public space. What I do care about is cosmology. Mm-hmm. My readers seem to care about it, and I seem to care about it, and so I'm going to write this kind of, provocation, right? So it was Why I'm a Creationist, and anyone can read it. Yahoo has not torn it down yet, to my knowledge.
No, I just checked it out for the first time today.
Oh, right. So, it's a pretty light piece, and it also, I think, it faults me for, I claim a certain intellectual laziness. And, what I've found is that put in a better way than I put it in the piece, a minimalist theism works for me. So, to the extent that I need a certain cosmological story to sustain me, I'm not like the debates around black holes or what preceded the Big Bang. I have read in the physics. I can't make out the equations, but I've tried my best to read Wilczek and other
Frank Wilczek, who figures at the end of the book.
Frank Wilczek, who figures at the end of the book, and Lisa Randall, and something in me just it just doesn't work for me. It just doesn't work. And the same thing about the...
You mean science in some sense doesn't work, or...
Well,
it is an interesting thing about you. You're so appreciative of technology, and yet in some ways skeptical, even in some ways and in some ways even alienated by science, which is an unusual combination.
Well, the actual equations have failed to, really describe to anyone's satisfaction what happened before the Big Bang, and certainly at the creation of consciousness. So, either you're happy sitting with that void, which Frank Wilczek, who won the Nobel Prize for writing about the Big Bang, he's happy with that void. I have, I've found that I'm happier with, putting God in there. Now, does that sound cheap to say? It costs me too much intellectually, and I feel, too much pain and anxiety with the scientific worldview around these two events. Like, do I believe gravity exists? Yes, I act as if I believe gravity exists. But I also act as if there's like a benevolent intelligence. The universe is a friendly place. And I'm almost powerless to act otherwise. So one of the things another thing that really determined my childhood, and probably yours too, was this dread fear that everyone around me had of nuclear winter, which we saw as almost inevitable. I had to star in a little play called No Last Flower, where I was like the last child on Earth. And I did, performed it like in this hippie performance on the side of the street. We would watch video after video of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, like people tearing skin off their bodies. And we wrote letters in school, this hippie school. We wrote letters to Andropov in Russia, asking that our small town be designated a target so that we would die in the blast and not the fallout.
Oh, whoa.
So anyway, the point is, as soon as that fear passed and we lived in dread fear of Ronald Reagan becoming the president and goading the Russians into mutually assured destruction, as soon as the Cold War cooled off, I resolved never to give another minute of my life to dread sinking fear of the apocalypse. I only had one chance on Earth. I thought that it could detour me into sophistry forever, parsing the differences between the blast and the fallout and what they would mean for me and my family. And I just was like, I'll never do that again. So both the ecological apocalypse and the, whatever the internet is doing to our brains, it's just, I'm like powerless to sign on to it. And over and over.
To sign on to the fear.
To sign on to the fear. To sign on to the fear and to sign on to persuading other people to be afraid. I mean, what we believe, and I'm with William James, I'm a pragmatist on this, what we believe, we believe what works. What works to, yes, make us feel better. That's the the kind of dismissive view of pragmatism, but also what shores up our class position, what wins us points at the seminar table, what our friends believe, what makes us stand out from our friends. I love to be a little different from the people around me. So who knows, maybe being a creationist, and writing that article was a way to distinguish myself from the reflexive atheists around me. But in any case, it served all those purposes.
But were you really a creationist? I mean, at the end of it, you say, I'm not saying I believe that the world was created in whatever, but, it's a nice story, and you pick the stories that feel good. So Frank
Wilczek and other scientists, that we know this, that scientists often describe and technologists describe code as very elegant. And I talked to a Harvard mathematician at the end of the book who says when he gets an equation right, and he literally works on Fermat's theorem, when he gets an equation right or a piece of it right, he feels like a major chord, like I'm in sync with the universe.
Sure.
And, 90+% of mathematicians are Platonists. They believe that numbers have analogs in the real world, in the sky. And that's a fairly mystical vision. And, we're talking mathematicians, the nuts and bolts of science. And, Harvard mathematicians, not science writers who have degrees in science writing, which, I still don't really understand. Who are like fighting battles for this person who hasn't done biology in a very, very, very long time, namely Richard Dawkins. So so anyway, mathematicians feel that feeling of elegance. They feel that feeling that things are right, that this is elegant, that this works. When they see that void, when they read see the equations, I can't perceive that elegance. My aesthetic doesn't see elegance in those equations. Scientific American just showed the ugliest equation in the world and the most beautiful. And I looked at both of them and I was like, I'm like a person that can't tell red from white wine. Like I have no ability to evaluate which is beautiful.
Did you do any programming in BASIC? This is going to sound unrelated, but I mean, have you ever had the experience of just writing a very simple amount of code and then it generates something kind of complex and interesting?
I have seen people do that. I did such simple stuff with BASIC. I didn't have that. But I'll tell you when I did. The first time I used computers in college was to do logical proofs because I did philosophy as an undergraduate. And I mean, nailing a logical proof using like modus ponens and modus tollens on a computer is freaking amazing.
Well, isn't that kind of the same thing?
Yes, that I could get. It was P's and Q's, but it was very connected to natural language, so that I don't think I could get so far as like to look at Fermat's theorem. And I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe I yet could. But what feels elegant to me, what works for me, what gives me that feeling of like peace and connectedness, and that makes life worth living, is this minimalist theism that I described. That there was
although I don't think professing a minimalist theism would have gotten you in any trouble if you'd put it like that and trotted out one of these kind of theologically liberal definitions of God, like the ground is being, or something even a little more ambitious. It was the creationism that got you, and I still don't know to what extent you meant to profess it, but anyway, that's what got you into trouble.
I mean, I looked deeply into what creationism might mean, and there is a weak and a strong version of it, and I'm certainly not a young Earth creationist. Although for some reason I don't know. Maybe it's just some side of me doesn't quite want to.
Let me tell you why I think you should subscribe more wholeheartedly than you seem to the theory of natural selection. It kind of gets back to Nonzero, but as you might imagine, the internet is definitely in some sense a beautiful thing. And it mediates all kinds of beauty in addition to mediating horror, like the universe itself, I guess you could say, and like natural selection itself. But it seems to me the internet, whatever you want to think about teleology, it just seems to me like such a natural outgrowth of the process of biological evolution. Yeah. I mean, complexity gets carried to higher and higher levels through biological evolution. Finally, you get these super smart creatures, humans. And then they set in motion this kind of technological/cultural evolution that sustains their trajectory by building these socially complex systems. Yes. And then you get to a global level where there's kind of almost a single global society. And there's this giant kind of brain-like thing, the internet. I mean, it seems to me like part of this sweeping creative process that is amazing.
Well, I'm glad to share this moment of like shackles off. Like that, yes, I'm completely with you. I mean, that I didn't describe it that well in the book, but that is exactly what I put my faith in. And what has that's the path that I see the world and humanity on. At the same time, in the book, you say, I ought to look more closely at natural selection. I mean, spontaneous mutation, natural selection, the basics of Darwin, of course, who can quarrel with them? And I start by saying, I'm not totally sure that the, new atheists have, read Darwin closely. I did read his books as literature in graduate school, and engaged pretty deeply with their tropes. I just didn't know how the work of Charles Darwin, and I also understood Darwin through your analysis. I didn't understand how it fell to Richard Dawkins and then fell to this very like crabbed position that was like I don't know, keeping writing on these matters more fearful and less expressive than it might be, especially by journalists who like have no obligation to fall for the Dawkins rhetoric.
Well, I've spent so much time complaining about the New Atheist that the commenters on this site complain about how much time I spend complaining about it. So
Right.
this one time I will restrain myself, which won't stop them from complaining about it, by the way.
Okay, right.
But I will exercise that heroic self. I certainly have my own issues with the New Atheists. I think Dawkins has certainly read his Darwin. Not all of them
Yes,
have.
absolutely, of course. So wait, just to the Twitter part, because this comes right up to it. The Reddit, the message board or whatever it is, Reddit, led with my why I'm a creationist, and just the clickbait title. And when Reddit has you in the top 2 stories, it's just a very weird day for you. And I've never come anywhere close to that. Or it's a very weird day for your avatar, and particularly on Twitter. So, I think people that should know better than to take their marching orders from Reddit piled on. And then people who shouldn't know better than to take their marching orders from Reddit piled on. And the result was, it was just like page 88 is an idiot. That's my Twitter handle. Page 88 is an idiot over and over and again. And then a couple of times a hashtag I'm sort of proud of. I don't know if you've ever gotten this. Hashtag WorseThanISIS.
I still aspire to that level of achievement, but I haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, WorseThanISIS. So, that seemed to be, and I don't actually think that the New Atheists do this, but that slippage from, what philosophers call an idealist position that like barely acknowledges some intelligence or organization, or in my case, God, at work in the world, and then turns you into a religious extremist who's like going to kill for her beliefs, is, a slippage that I was on the wrong end of. So the good thing was that wasn't a bad day for me, because once I realized that page 88 was having a freaking hard time on Twitter, and that the photoshopped picture of me that passes for me on Twitter, all the things that I've written on Twitter that could be dredged up, other things I've written also on the internet that could be dredged up to marshal a case for or against me, that battle was going to have to be fought, in this other world. And I happened to be in Florida with my cousins, and so I went out and decided that like me in this body was going to have a good day. So when I came back to the screen a couple days later, I was like, she's like really in a body cast, and usually she's like taking sniper fire for me and holding her own and returning barbs and thanking people and retweeting people and being a good citizen. But here she just she needs like 6 weeks to recover from this, and so I sort of like retired her for a while, and I came through it, and so that's definitely part of the last chapter. But I don't just want to redeem myself, but I also want to explain, there's various sections to the last chapter about how I became not quite the mystic. And so like you and I may be like pilloried for being mystics, but some of the paragons of our contemporary culture, including at Google, where they're trying to hack death and make people live forever. Ray Kurzweil just thinks that there's a few lines of bummer code that are keeping our bodies, in our millennia old hardware bodies, from, infinite beatitude. And then Jobs at Apple, shaping the way we see the world with his just like cracked Buddhism and weird medical practices. And then down at Compaq, where they invented the cloud, are these like, ferocious Baptists that sit on the board of like, evangelical churches. So, I'm not the only nutcase. And the fact that the internet and the tubes are determined by these freak out people, like really trippy, with a really trippy set of beliefs. Mm-hmm. They all happen to be men, so they don't get called like I did on Slate, like a weird macrame making, dream catcher making aunt.
Nobody's
like,
ever called me that. No.
Yeah, exactly. Men don't really get the dream catcher aunt thing, but the fact that they sound kind of rational, like Ray Kurzweil, and by the way, he could be right for all I know, when he lives forever. And
no, he's at least as far out there as any thing you've been accused of being. If you ask me, don't get me started on singularity. But
yeah, okay, but the singularity types, it's the very people that are like getting tons of money from VCs who also are like Ray Kurzweil's on our board. The point is like they're moving the economy. They're not. They're they work at Google. And that. So that the other thing that made me advance an idealist position is that I didn't expect that there were this many people like in New England, New York, the Eastern Seaboard, England, who were just like brittle atheists, because I had been around such blown out people listening to Deepak Chopra and, laughing all the way to the bank for $10 million from another VC, that I was like, I guess we're all freaks. And one of my kids was in Jewish school. Another kid was in Christian school. I go to church. I live in Brooklyn, the city of churches. I just was very surprised that any hint of mysticism was going to get me labeled worse than ISIS.
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, I think for certain strands of certain varieties of mysticism might have been okay. I mean, my own one thing I'll say on this front though is like a philosophy paper came out a couple of years arguing, kind of in a ostensibly rigorous way, that the chances are we're in a simulation. Okay, we're in a giant computer simulation. I don't think that's crazy, and I don't think the logic was not worth paying attention to. But that's like considered respectable. But the implications are there's like the equivalent. What's the difference between that and there being a god? I mean. Oh yeah. If there's really somebody out there who created this for their entertainment, well, what's off the table? That's kind of
that's like Berkeley, right? Yeah, that we're like figments in the mind of God. Well,
it's Berkeley plus theism, because the idea is there's some like super advanced civilization that created the simulation.
Right.
So
I think you and I agree that the internet is an extension of, or can be treated with existing philosophy. It's not like you need Ray Kurzweil. If you've read Kant and Berkeley and Hegel and Heidegger, you are armed with a lot of tools to think about and survive and thrive in online life. And if you hold fast to nostalgia or just recognize, I think I said somewhere, it's as though we're always, it's like the Austrian Empire has fallen, but all anyone can talk about, or the Roman Empire has fallen, and all people can talk about is like, I can't get great flatbread anymore. It's like such a small thing to talk about the minor inconveniences. Like, isn't it terrible when your daughter posts selfies on Instagram? That's our response to the sublimity of the internet. I've talked to I think people who would have big, amazing thoughts, and instead their major response to the internet is, my daughter plays Minecraft.
Yeah. No, I'm fine with big catastrophic concerns. Right. I have some of those myself. I'm a little apocalyptic. I worry that the whole system could fall apart because of some of the fragility and tribalism we're seeing. But I try not to obsess with the minor inconveniences. I can't claim I never have. But no, I take your point. And the book is, I don't know whether you consider it more celebration of magic or lamentation of loss. It seems a little more celebratory than whatever the adjectival form of.
I think so too, but I really, really like it, or elegiac or something. I really like, you said, lamentation. But I do think they're both part of the whole, and this is where I think you and I have in common some Buddhist leanings, that we need to feel the suffering, and feel the constant change of the internet.
Right, we should lament the loss.
Yes, lament the loss. And part of the reason the book gets so personal is that, I think with Zen that starts registering in the body, in the physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And the next book is about the, kind of the resistance to digital culture and the amazing flowering and efflorescence of anti-digital culture.
The next book is underway already?
The next book is in its embryonic stages.
Mm-hmm. I know that feeling.
But it's exciting to think about.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot we didn't have a chance to talk about. You go through and do kind of an extended essay on the various kind of, I don't know if media is the term, but text, images, video, music, and then you end with this kind of intellectual, very cerebral chapter that we didn't have time to do justice to. So there's a lot there, plus cool jacket. So congratulations on the book, Virginia.
Thank you, Bob. I like talking to you.
Okay, well, enjoy the rest of the book tour, the cyber book tour, whatever they are these days.
Yeah, they're book tours. Thank you.
All right, take care.
All right, you too.